Hello, dear students. I hope all is well with you and that you haven't had any difficulty in following my lectures so far. In the last two lectures, I talked about Mesopotamian civilization, which was the first civilization on Earth. Today, we will turn our attention to the next civilization, ancient Egyptian civilization. These two civilizations, Mesopotamian and Egyptian, were near contemporary. They came just about couple of hundred years apart from each other. Like the Mesopotamian civilization, I will talk about Egyptian civilization in divided in two phases. The first will be early Bronze Age and the second late Bronze Age. And we will begin with a brief discussion on the similarities and contrasts between the Mesopotamian and civilization so as to understand this new civilization better. As I said earlier, uh, Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations were similar in many respects, particularly because they were near contemporary. So there were similarities, but then there were some contrasts which made a stark difference between these two civilizations. Let us take a look at these contrasts between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Compared to Mesopotamia, Egyptian civilization, or rather Egypt as a land, as a country, was a bit more stable in terms of climate, in terms of weather, society, culture, religion, uh, because of the different circumstances that prevailed in Egypt. There was a big difference in climate also. In Egypt, they had a more pleasant climate compared to Mesopotamia. The climate, for example, was a bit more dry than in Mesopotamia. Uh, Rainfall was balanced, not too much, not too little. And then there was another contrast between Egypt and Mesopotamia in terms of availability of metals and building materials like stone. Egypt had ample deposits of metals and building stone, which Mesopotamia did not have. That is why Mesopotamians used mostly mud brick, for example, mud bricks to construct their houses. They used uh, they used clay tablets, if you remember, as writing material. But in Egypt, these things were different. They had stone, so they didn't need mud bricks to construct their houses. They could build their houses, their palaces, um, and of course, the great pyramids with stone. Then uh, take the question of floods. Euphrates and Tigris rivers had floods, and very often these floods were quite vicious, terrible floods that inundated the whole region, and people suffered a lot as a result of these floods. People were killed, people lost their properties, and so on. But compared to that, in Egypt, there was just one river, the river Nile, নীল নদ আমরা যেটাকে বাংলায় বলি. So the flood in river Nile was regular and not so turbulent, not so vicious as Tigris and Euphrates. The timing of the floods were also more predictable than Tigris and Euphrates. So people more or less knew when to expect floods and they could prepare likewise. And then the floods were not so vicious as to inundate the whole region. So, not much property was destroyed, not many people were killed. Another uh, advantage that Egypt had over Mesopotamia was in terms of natural barriers. Mesopotamia was a flat land. That is why it was open to invasions by foreigners. There was nothing to stop foreign invaders. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers were not broad enough to stop invaders. But Egypt was blessed with a number of natural barriers like desert, the Mediterranean Sea, and a number of cataracts on the river Nile. Egypt had desert on both east and west. It had Mediterranean Sea to protect it, uh, and then it also had a number of cataracts in the southern part of the country. Cataracts are waterfalls, uh, high waterfalls that from which water fell onto the river Nile. So most of the time of the year, it was very difficult to pass through the Nile from south to north. Movement from south to north was disrupted by these large, high cataracts or waterfalls. So Egypt had these natural barriers which protected it from foreign invasions and many misfortunes. That was one main reason why the Egyptian civilization sustained for nearly 3 millennia, nearly 3,000 years.